Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is March 23, 2025. Want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. Please subscribe. Also want to thank our guest, Ben Makinen, for participating in part one on December 29th, 2024. Where in the heck you calling in from, Ben? It's great to see you again.
It's great to see you as well, Gerry. Thanks for having me. I'm calling in from Bali, Indonesia, not India, Indonesia. I say that because there was a period of time when if you used an iPhone and asked Siri for the time in Bali, it would say the time in Bali, India is 10 a.m. I don't know if they ever fixed that, but it's Bali, Indonesia.
I appreciate you telling us where you're calling from and clarifying that. That's what I like about you, Ben, is you're concise, articulate, and you know how to have fun talking about this. But I do want to correct one thing I said in part one, just so it's on the record. You brought up your love of Colonel Bruce Hampton in his Aquarian Rescue Unit, which is a big influence on me. Frank Zappa had him on Lumpy Gravy. He's the father of jam bands, and he died on stage playing guitar. You know that? Boom, fell over, and every major jam band was in the audience celebrating his birthday, and he fell over, and everybody thought this must be an act. It was like, nope, I'm out of here. Boom. But here's the thing: I made a mistake. You said I love that mandolin playing. And I thought the mandolin player was Jeff Mosier. Jeff Mosier, who I've interviewed, is the banjo player. Matt Mundy is the mandolin player. So you know, having credits correct is a good mission for filmmakers and musicians.
That's big of you. That's great. Yeah. Thanks, Gerry, and hats off to Matt Mundy. Love his playing.
Yeah. Now, I thought I would bring up, of all people, I'm talking to a guy in Bali, Indonesia, and I brought up in part one, and you said no, that Marshall McLuhan said throughout his career, 40 years from 1940 to 1980, that the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can. And then I'm interviewing David Moss, and he says, well, that's what the New Guinea people say. They have no word for music. They do everything as well as they can. And then I looked it up on the internet, and it said there's a tribe in Africa who says there's no word for music. So just this sense of what Marshall's saying, the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can. You're in Bali. What do you think of that?
I think I understand the source of that statement and the sentiment behind it. I've been in Bali for 5 years, and I am married to a Balinese woman who was born in the jungle, basically born on the ground in a jungle hut. Her grandmother actually cut her umbilical cord with a piece of sharpened bamboo.
Oh, wow!
And that's 1988. And my father-in-law is a rice farmer. He and his wife plant and harvest by hand in the central jungle of Bali. So I'm pretty deep into the culture. I am shamefully behind the curve with my language skills. I can speak conversationally, but I'm not a master by any means of the Balinese vocabulary. I will tell you this. Of course, there are words for art and music. The Balinese. Okay, here's what's going on. Art and music in general, like the people you quoted, were they were channeling the spirit of. It is part of the culture. It's not traditionally done for any kind of commerce.
Yeah.
It's not done, artists and musicians aren't superstars. They're not seen as at least not until recently, not as seen as uh, they're not held in high esteem with any special talents, right?
Yeah.
The musicians and the artists are members of the community like anyone else who have an aptitude, and they make their art, they make their music to serve the needs of the community. So, for example, my father-in-law, I call him Nanang. Nanang is he's asked me to call him that, by the way. Any Balinese people out there might be going, no, 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 don't call him Nanang. Nanang is a very uh, old, maybe like we might think of it as a country bumpkin way
Yeah.
of saying grandpappy or granddad.
Yeah.
Modern Balinese would never call it, but my father-in-law asked me to call him Nanang. He likes that. My Nanang plays in the band, in the village orchestra, and here in Bali those are called the gamelan. A gamelan is a Balinese orchestra, the metallophones, the gongs, and the metal marimbas, for lack of a better word. So he'll spend all day in the field planting and harvesting rice. He grows flowers and peppers and tends to his fruit trees as well. The rice he grows is mainly a family crop. That's to feed his family. The cash crop are the flowers, the vegetables, and the fruit. So after he rinses off, showers, he'll go down to the Banjar, the community meeting center, and rehearse with the gamelan, with the band, and there's 20 other guys who are doing the same thing. The bamboo sellers, the holy men, and at this point, it is traditionally done. The music is traditionally played by the men in the villages. Nowadays, there are women, incredible women musicians who have who play in mixed gender groups and in all women groups. We can get to that, but the point is yeah, and the music is then performed for ceremonies.
Yeah.
So and no one claps and cheers for the musicians when they're done playing, because the music they play is connected to the dance that the women and sometimes the men are performing in front of in the performance area, in the community meeting grounds, if you will. So and it's the same with art. The wood carving here, the painting, it's on an artistic level that we in the West would see as a highly developed art form.
Yeah.
But again, it's just a thing that people do.
Yeah.
Now that being said, Gerry, now of course there are Indonesian and Balinese superstars, TV, movies, and now of course with the influence of the West, people come here. Now there are some, let's call them tourist parks, or tourist eco villas where a group of Balinese people will be hired as dancers and artists to perform for tourists.
Well, this is what you said, I think nailed it. Is Marshall's saying this 60 years ago, approximately 6-7 decades ago. You're saying that the sentiment of his statement is probably kind of right. They didn't go, I'm going to go make art. They're just saying, I'm going to be present in the world, and that means making music or making art. And it's not like a special, it's sort of like being special, but it's also almost like daily breathing. It's just
That's exactly right. That's right. Like the women wake up men and women wake up in the morning, and they make these little they take banana leaves and they weave them together. Nowadays, this is prepared. You can buy these in the village, but they're handcrafted. Typically, the women will handcraft a batch of banana leaves, staple them together. After they do these intricate weavings, they use their knife and scissors to cut shapes, to create shapes that are significant to the village they live in. And then these are filled with the flowers that my father grows, for example, with the combination of colored flowers, wild grasses. Everything's done just so. They're exquisitely beautiful. And they use these with a stick of incense to make an offering. They'll set them down on the road, up on a temple, put them on their motorcycle. You put them by the water pump, in the kitchen, on the stove. See this thing behind my head? Right there. That's called a plunky rong. That's that's basically a wooden shelf that's designed to receive these offerings. Every day we put one up there with the incense, throw some blessing water. These beautiful pieces of art sit up there for no one to see. They're for the gods.
Yeah.
So it's done for the community. It's done for the gods,
Yeah.
and it just so happens to our eyes to be powerfully beautiful works of art, exquisite.
Beautiful. Ben, you're my hero in so many ways because I go to your channel and you're playing funky meters drum. Then you learn how to play because Ola Tunji was banging away and you says I can do this by Lincoln Law. And then
Right.
Elvin Jones is the greatest ever. Yeah, it's endless how you hit all my key things. Like, how do you know this? So,
I'm really fortunate. Thank you, Gerry.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate this time. And this is basically what Aaron Copland probed music with. 4 elements of music or ingredients. Now, we know there's more, but just on these 4: melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. To start off, how would you say, what is tone color to the normal human on the street, not in academic music terms?
That's a great question. Wow. Yeah, tone color. I might try starting with an analogy and saying it's like the flavor of foods.
Wow.
Tone color. Yeah, tone color is what makes a banana taste different from a slice of pizza.
Wow. That is so, you don't know how well, because you have ESP up the yin yang. You don't know how much that's gonna, but you could suss it out more. Now, how do you how do you integrate? I never figured out the question I want to ask with this, because I say, how do you integrate these 4 elements? What do you focus on more? How do you interpret this 4 elements: melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color? Like when you're writing a Ben song, not an assignment, not a commission, you're just writing a Ben song. What happens with those 4 in your process?
Gerry, it's really cool that you picked the number 4, or that Aaron Copland did.
Yeah.
Because my answer, I'm going to tie that in with the Native American, or with some Native American philosophies, which is that the 4 directions are very important: the north, south, and east and west. You'll see that with the dream catcher, for example, and we have that with our compass. But some Native philosophies state that we as human beings are brought into the world bearing certain innate gifts, and those gifts are superpowers. A contemporary person might say, or there's this new movement of young 30-year-olds that call it your genius zone. Same thing.
Yeah.
We come into the world with an innate, maybe 1 or 2 of those directions already firing, maybe 3 for the super gifted people. And our journey through life is to complete the 4, complete the cycle. So that's why we live with other people, the animals and nature, to hopefully learn to learn from them, to learn their gift, to complete our circle of 4. That being said, when we look at the musical elements, I think in general, myself and many artists, I'm not going to say all, but in general, an artist doesn't stop to think like that. They don't say, I'm going to focus on rhythm. We tend to begin the process from our superpower. For me, I think I was born into this life with a strong sense of rhythm and melody.
Those 2, I see.
So I would tend instinctively, and then I gravitated to drums right away. Interestingly enough, I was told, I think it was in the 4th grade, we were going to be divided. All the kids were going to be divided into 2 groups. We were going to audition to be in the choir, which was, everyone wanted to be in the choir. And if they determined that you could not sing well enough to be in the choir, you'd get a plastic recorder And
Yeah.
so I auditioned at that, and I was told, and I got the plastic recorder. I was told I didn't have a good singing voice. Well, that actually kind of traumatized me. I kept my voice quiet for a long time after that. And uh, many years many years later, I was dating and living with a fantastic singer, and she started to encourage me to open my voice up again. And that's when I realized I gravitate to melody. Point being, if I were to sit down now at a piano, Gerry, or even at my drums, I would probably start with maybe a rhythmic bass line,
Yeah.
or a drum pattern, or a rhythm on any sense, and then I'd start humming something, and
Yeah.
it would be rhythm and melody, and then I would probably then the intellectual process would kick in to flesh out the other.
Yeah.
I'd say the tone color is somewhat intuitive as well, but
Yeah.
harmony comes next. And of course, as I say, artists are all, some people I know are just very harmonic oriented, and they just come from this, let's call it a chordal background. But
Yeah. Really good. You broke it down good. It's I don't have it refined as a question yet, and I'm working on it, but I want people to go, well, I'm a more melody guy. Like you said, I'm a more rhythm and melody guy. But what I like off the bat is you told me that American Indian thing last time, and I'm glad you told me again, because I'm amazed at what that lesson is. Oh, we might not have three things are kind of working, but your whole life journey is that. That is an amazing thing. But I asked you in part one, fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until you know what you said?
I can't remember.
Ask. And that is so amazing. That's what it is for me. My filling in is asking. And we watched the Bergman's The Seventh Seal the other day, and in the middle of the film, he goes, "Never stop asking questions, or you'll die." And it was like, when you said, I don't know what I think until I ask, I mean, that's exactly how I feel. I fill it in. I don't know what I think until I ask somebody else what they think. Then I know what they think, and maybe I'll think like they think. But that was
awesome.
really good. You really broke it down well. Now, let's go into that.
Thank you.
4/4 time, which I ended part one with. I says, wait until we have. Why is 4/4 time the most commonly used time signature in Western music? And if you could just bear with me, I want to read all this pre-bullshit, but it might get you thinking. Besides being intuitive and easy, 4/4 time, it might be because it's in sync with walking and marching or our heartbeat rhythm. Captain Beefheart varied from this 4/4 time. He called it the mama heartbeat. He said that beat, the same old 4/4, is related to fascism. It's so fixative, so hypnotic, so synthesized, it's dangerous to the heart. It's faster than the heart. Disco is dangerous. He wanted non-hypnotic music to break up that catatonic state. So I know that didn't really help, but just a few ideas. Is 4/4 time the most commonly time signature in Western music, and why? If it is.
Wow. Okay, that's a juicy one, Gerry, and I love your BS preamble, as you put it, because that's going to lead to some nice flavoring. Context. Beefheart. I'll address his thing first. The Beefheart was clearly responding to his times, and he was right. So the whole connecting it to fascism is myopic. I don't mean that in a judgmental or negative way, but that's what was going on in the politics of his time. And we could get deeper with that. He may have been tapping into the notion that music was being propagandized, weaponized. And there's I believe there's truth to that. However, that's an artifact of thousands of years after where your initial question, I think, drops us in. Humanity from
let me interrupt 1 second before I forget.
Yeah.
George Clinton has a great line. There's a fine line between disco and funk. You know, and that's very true, because there's some really, because it was like cool for boomers to hate disco. We were like, oh my God, disco's horrible. Disco wasn't horrible. It was just another genre. But we kind of wanted to diss it. So when George said, hey, dude, there's a fine line, he knew the bigger picture. So go ahead. Sorry.
Well, okay, let me jump in on that. And we're still, by addressing that, we're still like thousands of years beyond the root of your question, where I want to jump into.
Yeah.
But again, the difference between disco and funk, the difference between those two, the answer is going to change depending on, let's just say, the decade you're in, because those are labels of genres that are constantly changing. In the 70s, funk and disco could be perceived as different things, but I'll tell you this, and musically they were being produced and marketed in different ways, but not necessarily rhythmically. In other words, the beats, the rhythms of funk, the rhythms of disco, the rhythms of 4/4 are really the same as the rhythms of jazz and of Native American and of the 4/4 primal beat. Doom, 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 doom. I mean, that's Sing, 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 Benny Goodman. That's all the funk. That's all the disco. James Brown. I mean, there are some songs that use the 4/4. Funk tends to get a little more syncopated, but I'm just saying the difference between disco and funk tend to be more of a melodic and harmonic nature. Vocals, guitar, keyboards, what's happening there. The drums, you can take the same beat and put it in a funk song, a disco song, or a jazz. So that being said, and again, what Clinton was talking about is, it's important. That's a valid thing, but I don't think it's rooted in the rhythm. So your question, here it is. I don't think 4/4 is the original. I think it's 2. I think it's 2/4.
Yeah.
And because we are bipedal creatures. So the walking, we tend to think of walking as a 4/4 march, but it's even more so, it's 2. And until it repeats, right? Left, right, and then we're repeating. So it's really only 2. You could get metaphysical and call it the 1. It's all 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. But and I think I'm asking myself now that actually could be more the case, because it takes an intellect to start dividing things, to start seeing, when you compound something and then analyze it and perhaps divide it, that's an intellectual complexity. Whereas an initial state, a less intellectually complex, a more primal, might just be and not worrying about where it repeats or what division it is. And the reason I'm saying this is because we see, again, I'm going to jump thousands of years ahead from our primal ancestors. When we start listening to, when we read the oral histories about the early blues, about some of the field hollers or the gut bucket stuff that we don't necessarily have recordings of, the musicians in the middle 1800s that W.C. Handy would have stumbled across and borrowed from we're often guys playing with disregard to a form. Like in other words, they were keeping a pulse to tell a story, and if their lyrics repeated after 13 bars or 7 bars. So this gets back to the idea that it's pulse based, and it doesn't matter if it's 2/4 or waltz time 3/4. And I think different communities communities, different indigenous people came up with their own things. But I think it starts with 2. 2/4. And the early jazz is performed, the early jazz music, the music that would become known as jazz, because jazz was not used to define a genre of music until 1915 in print. That's when we first see the word connected to a kind of music. But the kind of music that was being labeled was typically played in 2/4 or 6/8,
Yeah.
which comes from the marching. It comes from marching band music.
Yeah.
Bumped, 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 bump, bump, bumped, bump. So I think your question is the heartbeat and our bipedal design would give us a natural inclination to a walking tempo. I'd call it a walking tempo, but and then that becomes 2: left, right, repeat, repeat, or right, left, 4/4 is more advanced than 2/4, but 2/4 and 4/4 are arguably the most primal and obvious things. However, we've got 5 digits on our hand, and when you and so someone who's going do might come up with 5/4, and we see 5/4 rhythms all around the world as well. I mean, it's so human beings being creative. I think we start with the heartbeat and the walk, and then we're off to the races.
Really good, Ben. A couple quick things.
By the way, Gerry, I'm counting on you cutting me off or interrupting if I just seem to be going.
Oh, no. I love you going on and on. Like I said, I'm open for tangents, stories, anecdotes. It's all good. But John, and these are just more prompts. Same, keep it going. John Lee Hooker, I know we brought him up last time. He was known to hire a band to back him, and then he wouldn't do the traditional changes. So they were like, all these guys would hire local bands because they knew how to play. Chuck Berry would hire the local band to back them, so he wouldn't have to travel with a band. And John Lee Hooker would hire these musicians. They're like, man, this guy he won't change when you're supposed to in the blues structure. So when you said he was doing the pulse to tell the story, so
That's
he's
right.
not. He might not change in 2/5/1 or whatever it's called, the regular.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And then
well, let me jump in. That's
Yeah.
a fantastically astute observation, and it's critical to understanding. That is a point of contention at which I think people make a serious mistake. Because who are the people we admire? The people we talk about and as musicians tend to copy are the innovators. They are the John Lee Hookers. They are the Blind Lemons. They are the Lead Bellies. They are the Robert Johnsons. And these people didn't go to school to learn. And arguably what makes them great is that they didn't begin the creation of their art or their story with a set of restrictions. It was the complete opposite. They sat there with the instrument they had in their hands, and they got into this place and they told the story they needed to play. And what's interesting, I catch myself as a father with children singing lullabies to my children or making up songs throughout the day as we're in the world. And I find, your mind has to be clever to rhyme and fall within a structure. So if you're trying to stay within a 4/4 groove and kind of a poetic, an iambic pentameter or whatever kind of lyrical form you're adhering to, maybe you're transposing the melody. You're taking the melody from the ABC song or the Happy Birthday song and you're making up lyrics. You have to intellectually be a couple steps ahead to choose a word and to sing it in a rhythm so it falls just right. So with that kind of intellect engaged, you're really not free to create as much. I found, I've done a lot of this, if I just don't worry about keeping it in 4/4, if I don't worry that I'm doing a 7/8 bar or that I'm in a 14.5 bar structure, then I can tell the story I want to tell. And the beauty is children don't care. The children don't know that you're changing the form.
That's so
and
good. Dad, you're fucking jumping to 5/8 time instead of 4/4 time there. Get it together, dude. Go study Elvin a little more. Come on, man. But Ben,
so
have you
so so well
go
so
ahead,
let me just, I got a little more here, Gerry.
please?
I played with a fantastic blues musician named Lionel Young.
Yeah,
Lionel Young's out of Colorado. He's been an international blues competition winner a couple times as a soloist. His brother plays violin or viola, I think, with the Boston Symphony. He comes from a musical family. He's a literate, school trained guy, but he part of his life he learned Delta blues from some of the descendants of the original masters down in the South. Lionel Young is one of the greatest Delta blues musicians I've ever played with in his ability
yeah,
to channel this deep, haunting
yeah.
Mississippi Delta. Like, where the hell is this music coming from? It's haunting. Lionel Young would never tell the band the key of the song he was going to start. He would rarely tell the title of the song. He'd just start stamping his foot, or actually he plays violin. He plays electric violin. Sometimes bring 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 bring. He just start, and before you know it, he's singing. And it was up to us as a drummer. It's
Yeah.
easier to jump in. It's just a rhythm. I just have to find the groove. Bass players and piano players and rhythm guitarists would have a hard time. They had to use their ears. And guess what? That meant that they're not regurgitating formulaic stuff where they fall into the canatotic state that your buddy Beefheart was talking about for and a lot of times with what sucks the life out of jazz today, out of rock and roll, is when the band gets on stage and they already know exactly how the music's going to go. Then they can focus on knocking a couple shots back, checking out the girls in the front row, thinking about paying their rent, or showing off, doing a couple little extra fancy tricks, because the music's already rehearsed and locked in and unchanging, undeveloping. So when these blues guys did that, and these blues guys weren't doing that to force innovation, they didn't know any better.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it, because
That's the beauty. That's the back to the Balinese have no word for art. They didn't like, we're creating. But anyways, this is funny because the great Bob Lucas in Ohio taught me this line. The next song's in the G of key. And then if you haven't heard this, play the song Who Are Parents by the Shags. Have you ever heard the Shags?
I love the Shags.
The worst band in the history of the world, but they're so bad they're good. The great drummer Morgan from Sweden, he played with Zappa when he was a teenager. I put, because Frank loved him, and he says, you got to play the Shags, and I put it on, and he goes, does the drummer think she has a groove, or is she purposely playing bad? I says, no, man, she thinks she has a groove. It's amazing what they did, you know.
And what they did was not think. And that's the beauty of it. You could argue, I've heard the stories that they were trained by their father, that he
no,
actually
not trained. He kind of said,
Yeah.
go play. And then the engineer in the session goes, don't you want him to practice? And the dad goes, no, I want to get them while they're hot. That was perfect. He did. He wanted to get them before they learned. And they played their high school music events, and people would throw Coke cans at them.
You know, it's a fascinating story on so many levels. The father was a genius for doing that. Was he also cruel?
I shouldn't say. I don't know the whole story, but
I don't know. You know,
yeah.
I recently, it's funny you bring them up, because I knew nothing about them, ironically, until David Booker, who's now passed. He was one of my mentors. He's a blues guitarist from Manchester, England, and he came to America. There's a funny story. If we have time, I can tell you how I met. Do we have time?
Sure.
This is a funny story. David Booker, in essence, came to America and ended up teaching a lot of great American musicians about our own musical past. He's the one that knew all about the Delta blues and all of the B-sides of Chess records, and he knew all of the missing puzzle pieces of music that got us from that slippery R&B between jazz and rock and roll and blues. And a lot of when I met him in the early 90s, I was a musician that had already been to university for a few years. I had already toured. I'd done big band jazz. I knew a lot of music. I could read. I was doing Broadway shows. I did not know much of anything about the really important roots music outside of jazz. I knew my Jelly Roll Morton, Louis Armstrong. I say knew. I was aware
Yeah.
of this music.
Yeah.
I was unaware of all of this music that David Booker had learned and got turned on to in England, in major part because of the what was it called, the Blues and Folk Festival that of the 1960s that was brought over to England.
Yeah.
They were responsible for bringing all of the living U.S. blues legends over to England, and those performances in England are what turned on guys like Led Zeppelin and the Who and Stones to. Okay, so the reason I'm telling this story is Booker is the one that turned me onto the Shags at a point in my life when I had been practicing to a metronome. I had been reading drum methodology books. My whole my whole programming to qualify myself as a professional musician was exactly what was not being done in the Shags. and yet at that same time, I had met some other guys, Ron Bucknam, who's in my movie Jazztown, who was turning me on to avant-garde, was turning me on to the idea of breaking away from that stuff so we could have an actual conversation musically that wasn't based on cliches and regurgitated licks. So the Shags came along at the right time for me to go like, what the is going on here? And it was so beautifully copyable. Like, any record
No, you
that came
can't
out.
copy it. And then they do Broadway shows, they do movies about the Shags, everything. There's
that's right.
who cover them perfectly. What really quick on the avant-garde though, did you see the documentary on Milford Graves?
Yes, I actually watched that a couple years ago.
Good. Because I was just wondering, that's a great connection. That's a missing link between the avant-garde jazz drummers in everything you've learned. And then you put the Shags in the middle. That's so funny.
Boy, it's a shame. You mentioned Milford Graves. It's a shame that guys like that and their story are so difficult to find and have been so buried, as it were. That's a whole nother thing. Why the neoclassicists.
Your job as the great filmmaker you are. You're taking your musical world and going, I can continue to spread the word by this other medium. Your films are great in that regard.
Thank you.
Let's go to that back to it for a second. George Clinton, who I just got the book, his band is the only band. It's the oldest band in the world, Ben. 70 years together. So before that, it was Sun Ra, but Sun Ra died. Then it was
just going to say Sun Ra.
Count Basie was the oldest band together. Basie died. The Blind Boys of Alabama are one of the oldest bands in the world, but none of the original members. The only band that's 70 years old is George Clinton. And he said the great line, everything is on the one. So when you were saying one, he said it in a song. And then the Zappa has a great line in the middle, I think Joe's Garage. He says, Ed Mann will call Vinnie Colaiuta up and show him where one is. One. One. So when you were saying that one stuff, but I did have some fancy musician on recently, and I said, is the heartbeat in 4/4? She goes, no, it's in 3/4. What do you think the heartbeat is in? Is it a time signature?
Well, the heartbeat. This is one of those great questions, and I think a lot of musicians would have fun debating this, but because the heartbeat is a metaphor for really any naturally occurring pulse we hear or feel, and the mind is capable of delineating or defining it in any way it sees fit, and sort of,
Right.
you know,
That's
and
good. It is. It's meta. That's
it really
it.
is. So at that point, if we're determined to find a correct or definitive answer, we've got to put on our thinking caps and maybe even use some science. Otherwise, it's like going back to tone color. How is a person going to describe the flavor of a banana when
Yeah.
some people hate bananas? So how are they going to give an objective description of the flavor? Well, here's the thing with the heartbeat. I believe I'm no cardiologist, so don't go home and try this on your own. But I believe the heart is comprised of two basic components, in and out. Right? We have the arteries, the aorta and the something else. So the heart pumps. One is to squish the blood out, and then the other pump brings it in. Now, if that's correct, there's two functions. It goes back to our bipedal left right
Yeah.
or right left, and then it repeats. So if now the reason I'm questioning that is because maybe both functions are served on the initial pump. Like, does one pump of the heart both bring in and
Yeah.
bring in and out at the same time? Then it's a one.
Yeah.
Its cycle is completed after one. Its scientific physiological cycle is completed. So if we need a definitive answer, it's one, boom, boom.
Wow. Everything's on the one. Back to that. Well, Ben, that's funny because
But we don't. But the thing is we don't walk on the one unless we're skipping, unless we're jumping, hopping. It's what's really interesting is our cycle as walkers, our bipedal walking. The cycle repeats after two. So if the heart is one and the walking is two, maybe we're living in a 3-4 pattern. It gets
wow. How do you spell bipedal? PEDAL?
yes, with a
Okay.
BI in front of it.
Bipedal.
And what's funny about BI is that's part of BIAIFF.com. That's my new Bali International AI Film Festival that I just started.
That is, yeah. Dude, I love your plugs. Your plugs you're so professional, but you're still so playful. But what I really loved was when you did that thing to the LA filmmakers. Go there and do the citizen of journalism.
You saw that?
That was good, dude.
Oh, thanks, Gerry. I got one of those taken down on TikTok. It was removed, and I was asking people to do your duties as citizen journalists to be safe, but go out. But what I did is I made a comparison. I mentioned FEMA. I mentioned that I said something like, do this before FEMA erects the barriers and keeps you out of your own. Gone.
No, you're smart. Yeah. No, there's some heavy dudes who do that on YouTube. They get on their GoPros on their motorcycle and they go through all that stuff. And I mean, one of my best teachers in the political world said, always watch the news the second it happens, because about an hour later, they'll start going, nope, you can't put that on anymore. They'll start censoring news.
Oh, wow. They're right.
Oh, yeah, they do that.
Who is that? Who is the person?
Who taught me that? Bill Mitchell. He's a political researcher who I worked with for years, but he passed. But here's the thing you said that I loved, that the heartbeat time. That's this thing I just learned recently is, if McLuhan's kind of right, and he said all words are metaphorical, all words are made up, they're all metaphor, then
that's right.
Then the word literal is a metaphor for what? Because you want to say, okay, literally, Ben, is the heartbeat in 1 or 3/4 time or 4/4? You kind of went, well, it's kind of in 1. But some people go, well, the heartbeat's in 4/4 time. Basically, everybody's saying it in metaphoric, because science, which is another topic I want to get into, what's the difference between art and science? Science uncovers facts that can be interpreted 1,000 ways. So that's what you're saying, that it's there, the metaphor for a natural pulse in trying to determine what time the heartbeat is in. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, okay. So everyone's heartbeat differently. So
Yeah.
there's a scientific function of the heart that I think we can all agree on. It's there to pump the blood. It draws it into the heart. It pushes it out. Right. I think
Yeah.
we know that much. And but every human being has a heart that has its own rhythm. And throughout the day, this is like, where does the sand meet the ocean? Right? Where is the borderline of the
Yeah.
beach and the ocean? Well, guess what? It's changing every single second.
Yes.
So our heartbeats throughout the day, when we go to bed at night, it might be a slow lullaby pulse. Doom,
Yeah.
doom, doom, doom. We get up, we jump down the stairs, we put some
Yeah.
cold water. Boom, 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 boom,
Yeah.
boom, boom. I got to get to work on time. Boom, 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 boom. So the heart is doing the same exact thing. Its
Yeah.
physiological function does not change. It's a fact, and yet it's changing like an electron field. It's bouncing all over the place. So
Yeah.
it gets back to your story about it wasn't Lead Belly. It was not Howlin' Wolf.
John Lee Hooker not
Thank
playing.
you.
Yeah.
Who was a great 4/4. Don't
He was a
no,
great 4/4, but then you would think, oh, I could play easy with him. Then he would, wait a minute, you were supposed to change three whatever ago.
it's a great. Those guys are so great. It gets back to what
Yeah.
I was saying when I played with Lionel Young. It forces you to go so deep, to get as empathic and ESP and as connected into their vibe, into their field, into the energy vibrational thing, so that you're one again. And this goes back to your initial question about what four musical components do you use when you compose. Well, ideally they're all firing if you're not thinking about it. And when you play with someone like a Lionel Young or a John Lee Hooker or anyone who allows their individual humanity to get in the way of formula, I say that facetiously, get in the way. It forces you to get to get in their slipstream and as close to them. And that's where some deep magic, that's where transformation can happen. That's where you as a sideman can be taken into something greater, into the unknown. Wow, we have a huge jungle bumblebee that just joined us in this broadcast. And I'm typically, and it has stung me once. And of course, it's because I foolishly tried to grab it by the wings and put it back outside. So I'm going to leave it alone. But
if you need to
that big.
Well, if you need to act, you go ahead. I'm
not going to act. The last time I it acted and got me. So I'm just saying.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Gerry.
But would you? Yeah, you go.
Well, I think. Okay. Here's another story. You were talking about the one. Who was it? Ed Mann telling Vinnie Colaiuta where the one is. I had the great pleasure. It was a life-altering blessing, really, to encounter a man who is now transitioned. He died a number of years ago. His name is David Sekulu Kweshe.
Yeah.
He was a master of Mbira from Zimbabwe. Sekulu, Sekelu, Gweshe, Gweshe. He was a spirit master of his community and a music master. He was like a medicine man and the master of Mbira, which is the thumb piano. Some people call it a kalimba, thanks to Earth, Wind, and Fire. In Zimbabwe, it's the Mbira, Mbira. Well, I met him in Denver, Colorado. I think it was 2001, and ended up befriending him. He came over to my home quite often and tried to and began to teach me his music so that we could go out as a duo. He was part of he had come to America as part of a stone carving exhibit. The famous Zimbabwean stone carvers were putting on a show at a a demonstration at the Botanic Gardens, and he came along to play as kind of a cultural aside to play the music of Zimbabwe, and so he needed extra work. So I worked to get him some gigs, and he started to teach me his music so that I could play drum set with his mbira. He had invented this huge, I think it was a 42 keyed thumb piano.
Wow.
It was a dream. It was a vision from the mbira spirits. And so there we are in my basement, and he starts playing this song, and he's singing and he's chanting, and he had already shown me a rhythm to play, but I couldn't determine where to come in. I didn't know where the one was. And I had to say, Sekulu, where's the one? And he said, I think I might have used the word the downbeat. But then I said, the one, where is the start of this cycle of phrase? And he said, there is none. We don't count it like that. You feel it, at this point in the music. It wasn't 1, 2, 3, 4. He couldn't tell me that way. And it really fucked me up. I mean, I felt lost. I was lost, and I was like, I know I can do this if you just show me where to start, because I had worked to get the mechanics of the groove of he had spent the time to show me on the drums the pattern he wanted me to play, which again was something very unusual, very undrum set language.
Yeah.
And it forced me to sort of free fall into the music and find my place, falling amongst this churning, moving groove. And so it's a fascinating opportunity to go beyond, is it 1, is it 2, is it 4? It's just like, this is like sink or swim. You're in the ocean. And
it's really beautiful. Where it reminds me of a McLuhan line: carefully make plans, then do the opposite. Carefully know where that's why Frank made fun of it, saying the percussionist Ed Mann will call you up, Vinny, and show you where 1 is, and that's it. The other guy goes, there is no 1. And then George says everything's on the 1. So here's the innovative drummer for Beefheart. His name was John French, Drumbo, and he expanded the drum sound. And my friend played some of this stuff once, and it's like drunken sailor music. So it reminds me of Buster Keaton. How do you turn a stumble into a dance? You're like, and really reminds me of, my sister was a cheerleader, and she would make up cheers by taking an empty soup can and throw it down the stairs into the basement. And the can would hit the stairs and go, gung, 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 it would make up a beat. So she's getting it like organically from the world, not trying to think up one. And so then my friend told me, when I told him that, they said, that's what Jay Dilla does. I've never got into his music, but that's what he did. He kind of messed with this, what your African friend was already doing. There's no 1, So this is onward and upward. Go ahead.
Well, okay, let me qualify that. Add some context and nuance. There is, music serves many different functions and different needs, and I think there's a time and place. People employ different qualities of music. They play around with, they manipulate those 4 elements you talk about: harmony, rhythm, tonal quality, and melody, for various needs. Sometimes they're manipulated intuitively, because someone's channeling something. But my point being is, the music is never static. It's there. What I'm getting at is, there are times where there is a 1, where it's critical. A lot of James Brown, a lot of great funk, a lot of great dance music works because the band is hitting on the 1. In Cuban music, we would say it on the 4. Basically,
Wow.
they key off of beat 4, 1, 2, 3, bop, and all of the percussion section rhythms lock in general on beat 4. One beat 1 can be absent. That's what gives salsa it's really cool. Maybe the can tumbling down the stairs, but it's
Yeah.
very, but it's something. It's almost a rule, a law. The clave, the key of that music, is followed very rigidly, very religiously, very it's policed
Yeah.
for salsa music to come off the way it does in a dance club. You know, there are creative people who play with it, but the clave,
Yeah.
you don't mess with the clave. 3 2 3 2 or the other way, and locking on beat 4. In funk, a lot of that music you lock on beat 1. Bow, bow, whatever. That's where the power of James Brown and P Funk and
Yeah.
can come from. Now, when you play around with it, you're going to get the funky meters. You know, when you play around with it, you're going to get some of those
Zig.
Delta Zigaboo. You're going to get some Delta Blues. You're going to get uh, the extreme would be the Shags, but
The Shags play the meters, greatest hits.
you know, yeah. You know, you get, and then you have everything in between. A lot of the great jazz, Cannonball Adderley groups,
Ooh,
Count Basie, they're tight. The band is all locked.
yeah.
You get a group, you know, you get some John Coltrane interstellar moments, and the band is together, but there's a lot of looseness going on. They're not concerned about hitting a 1, 2, 3, 4, bang, chang-a-dang, chang-a-dang, chang. They're, you know, they're. So when we talk about it, I just want to remember it. There are music where there is a 1, and then there's music where.
This is why you're a good teacher, because you know what's called comprehensive awareness, the big picture.
I'll write that down.
Yeah, that's like if you study the patterns, you've studied the patterns, then you get big picture, comprehensive awareness.
Well, you know what, Gerry? You know what's fascinating? Comprehensive. What we're talking about, and one of your very first points that you like to do, and you said that I came up with, that I answered you, was ask. We ask questions to know things. And the thing is, what I've found, especially today, it seems, is where our Western society is getting away from asking questions, and they're losing a comprehensive awareness. People are, for whatever reason, they're insisting that there is one answer and it must be this way. And if you don't toe that line, you're a conspiracy theorist or you know.
Yeah. No, asking in Eunice Cage nailed it. Ben, John Cage nailed it. He said, they asked him a question. He goes, that's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer. that is the ultimate right there, because why do you ask? That's like the whole thing about stupidity. And I go off for an hour on that, but look at stupidity, as Zappa said, is the building block of the universe. You don't know something, so you ask. And it doesn't mean you're stupid. It means you want to learn. So when people go, that's a stupid question. I mean, dude, I don't want to tell you, but I interviewed a guy last week, and almost every question he goes, that's a stupid question. He would attack me. And those are the best, because then I have to learn how to kind of maneuver jujitsu and be kind and like say, fuck you. You already agreed to do this. Just go along with it. You know, just give me your hunch or your guess. In fact, I won't name his name, but here's the thing. When I said, the Balinese have no word for music, they do everything as well as they can, he said, that's a racist statement. And I'm like, wait, come on. McLuhan wasn't saying it as a racist statement, and he got it from somebody else. All of McLuhan's great lines, he got from someone else. You could trace them down. But here's,
I'd like to look into that. It's really interesting. When I first got to Bali, and was starting to immerse myself in the culture and try to understand, so much of this culture is, it's beyond a 180. I had a Russian neighbor here when I first arrived, and we were talking about, wow, the culture here is such a 180. And he goes, no, it's not the 180, it's a 240. Meaning, you know, but what I'm getting at is, I was asking my wife, my wife was my guide and helping me understand things. And I would be confused because sometimes I'd go to her and say, this guy told me, I asked this and he said yes. And she told me, Ben, the Balinese are very polite and humble people, and they're very shy around. They can be very shy around Westerners because they don't speak English well. So they'll tend. Their tendency is to make you happy. They're happy that you're visiting their island. They're happy that you're showing an interest in their culture. They're just going to say yes. They'll say yes to a lot of things. So if you're trying to find definitions or nuance, and a lot of times a Westerner will actually supply the answer to their question. They'll say, does that mean to go now? Something like that, instead of what does that mean?
Yeah.
And so they'll just go, oh, yes. They, they don't have the language to describe the nuance, and they don't want to make you upset, and they think you just want to go. They see that it's okay for you to go, so they say yes, go. and so McLuhan, some of these early anthropological, they may have been, their interpreters may have been off or missing, or the local community just wanted to make that person happy and tell them what they think they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
Because and part of that is, how do you get into the nuance if your language is only good enough to say hello, goodbye, yummy, more, less, or whatever. Nighttime, you can say good night and good morning. If someone asks you to explain how art is used in the community, the effort to try to explain that, not having language, is just like, oh no, we don't have that.
Yeah. Ben, it's like you just saying anthropologists, we probably won't even get near. We won't even finish music in this chapter. I hope we can do chapter 3 and finally get into film, because McLuhan's colleague, Edmund Carpenter, was the first kind of, he's told to be the first click. Yeah, he's sort of the guy who they say was the first one. When you go to another country and you start filming this other country, anthropological, study, you give the camera to them and let them film themselves. And that was Edmund Carpenter. He was the first to do that. And he's a deep, and I want to get into all that with you about documentary filmmaking. But here's the next music thing. My friend says the 3 T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. Technique, you've learned how to play drums. Theory, you know the structure. How does one acquire taste?
That's interesting. I can be such a contrarian or a comprehensive awareness type of guy. I don't know who your friend is who said that. I might actually reprioritize those and say it with a stretch of the definition. I might say it actually starts with taste, and you don't need technique as such. In other words, the technique is innate, whatever you have now.
But no, he didn't put them in order. He just said the 3 T's, so you could repeat them the way you want. Yeah.
So the question
is how does you can acquire technique from studying? Yes. You can acquire theory from studying. How do you acquire taste?
Okay, great question.
Because you gravitated towards the Shags or Elvin Jones or Olatunji, but you could have gravitated towards other genres.
That's a fascinating question, Gerry, because I'm tempted to answer that as a teacher who feels confident I can teach someone almost anything. Like I know that in fact, I'm designing a course to teach creativity, to develop neural elasticity, and very practical, physical, non-intellectual exercises that will increase your creativity. So on the one hand, I feel like I could answer that by saying taste can be taught uh, uh, through basically osmosis, but I'm going to go back. But then I question that because the presumption about a person needing to develop their tastes is almost egotistical.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's the. There's a presumption that we need to change someone's taste. People's tastes obviously naturally develop. As children, you might hate tomatoes, and then you grow to like them, or so some things are adaptive.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily mean they're good. But what I'm getting at is that we think it would be like for example, I think it would be great if everyone loved my movies, if everyone had the taste to understand my movies, right? Never going to happen, and it's a good thing that doesn't happen for what should be obvious reasons. So we benefit from having people with what we perceive to be bad taste or stupid questions, because that forces us to refine our position.
Yes.
Someone hits us with the stupid question, we have to, like you say, do some jujitsu and decide if we're going to respond that with composure and from our heart, leading someone to deeper understanding, or at least leading them to what our understanding is. Or,
Yes.
and if someone stumbles across our path with horrendously bad taste, there goes an external light. I have to replace a battery. Look at that. Filmmaking.
That's strobe.
That means
I had to interject. Good to interjection time.
That means those batteries. But so here's the thing. I'll answer your question. You just have to be, if you want to change someone's taste, you have to learn how they learn. In other words, find their optimal open-minded moments, and offer them and set on the table dishes that you'd like them to try. For example, let me go ahead. What's your next?
That was good, because my feature film has strobe effects, and you have to put a warning. It has strobe effects. But one of my favorite film people, when he saw it, he goes, "It's the best film I never want to see again." But most people say, Ben, when I say, how do you acquire taste? They go, from exposure, from what you get exposed to, because your mom was playing you Isaac Hayes and your dad was playing you that. But I think taste might come from other places, and we don't know. We think it's you're being taught taste, and
right? So, I mean, think about all of the people who say, "Man, I hate my parents' music."
Yeah,
they could have been playing Beethoven and John Coltrane, and so I happen to, I believe I benefited from quite immensely from the things my parents exposed me to. But I imagine it's very interesting, because while they were exposing me to these things, Isaac Hayes, Herbie Hancock, John Coltrane, Dave Brubeck, whatever, at the same time, I'd step out the door, get in someone's car, and I was hearing FM radio. I was hearing, John Denver on the radio. And I'm not saying that's not good music. I'm just saying, it is a very interesting question. There is osmosis, and exposure is a big part of it.
Yeah, it's granola. That's granola rock, or now they call it yacht rock. Yacht rock. And
I've heard that.
Like, I think it's funnier. I used to call that Neil Young flannel shirt rock, and then that was the uniform for grunge. And I goes, right. I know. Yeah, but here's what you said earlier. I says, what's tone color in a non-academic term? And Ben, what you said was flavor. So when you say the word taste, it implies something in the gut, and it implies maybe it's not so much something you're exposed to. There's something inside you that it's unexplainable. It might not be explainable taste. So here's the follow-up, and you can go into it deeper. This is McLuhan saying two things. Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. So there you go. You've got gamelan music. You've studied all these Delta blues. Is the reason cultures have, and I'm not asking you to agree or disagree with it, it's just a prompt. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. So that's why he says song is slow down speech. He's talking poetically in the beginning because, song, scat singing, faster speech, So any thoughts on that? And I can say it again if you want.
I think I got the gist of it. I think, again, coming from McLuhan, his the lens through which he's communicating is a language model. I mean, he's all about words, spoken and written words, and much music, arguably the earliest music, had no words. So so they were trance inducing, or rhythms and textural sounds, and then flutes and maybe a nonverbal vocalizations. Of course, I'm just speculating, right? I wasn't there. we don't have any recordings, but it seems logical to me to assume that, or to presume that in the beginning there was sound before spoken language. Before the symbolic representation that words are. Because that's an important distinction, because those meant things like get out of my way, right? So they're nonverbal, but they carry meaning and communication. That being said, there was probably a lot of music in the beginning that like lullabies to your baby. It might have been just humming or soothing sounds. So so starting with that, the music and the purpose of the music and the message conveyed through song isn't always connected to our words.
But it's called musical taste. Like, some people can't handle maybe tuba throat singing or gamelan music. And is that connected to the way we speak our language? That's post. Yeah.
Probably. I mean, probably, like for example, you said, like in early cultures, I don't really imagine many people disliking the music. Like, you wouldn't have someone saying, I don't like gamelan. You wouldn't have a Balinese person saying that.
Right.
Now we can, because they have exposure. They've been able to develop different tastes.
Yeah.
And the freedom of thought to have their own opinion and to be able to express, the notion that you have an individual choice to make in what you eat, think, or do. That's kind of it's both primal but almost advanced, because I think some communities, some people actually de-emphasize that part of, in order for survival. Groupthink was crucial for survival. But yeah, gamelan, I think about that a lot, Gerry, actually, because gamelan music is fascinatingly complex to me. It's like almost on a bizarre level of complexity. And my wife's mother tongue is as equally complex and mystifying to me. It's just a jumble of nonsensical sounds to me some days.
but then just a few minutes ago, when you were doing the nonsense, but God, it sounded like Fang from the Soupy Sales show.
I don't know that one.
Oh man, you were quoting Fang perfectly.
Wow.
Look him up. Soupy Sales.
Yeah, sure, I'll look that up.
Okay.
So
what's more fundamental? What's more fundamental, language or music?
Oh, music, for sure. Well, again, I just caught myself with the definition. I mean, music is a language. So I think I know what you mean. The spoken word.
Yeah.
Versus music. And what was your question? Which is more foundational?
No, what is more fundamental?
Fundamental. Well, in the beginning, sound and music, I believe.
Yeah.
It begs the question, what was sound used for? And again, the notion of music, this is where we get to McLuhan's language, I think. The notion of music as something separate from fundamental communicating. If sound and vibration serves a healing purpose, we wouldn't think of it as music. Like music, the word music, at least to us, tends to suggest something of a what's the word, a luxury item,
Yeah.
something's that's not fundamental or necessary, right? Like but if sound was used for healing purposes, or which can include inducing trance, which is a very good thing if you're healing, going back to Clinton's or Beefheart's diatribe against 4-4.
Yeah.
When you're bringing a people together, when you're bringing them together for healing or for cohesion, then there's nothing more powerful or fundamental and important than that trance and those sounds. And what's cool is, as a visitor to a foreign country, how many people do you know that just get like transfixed by music that they don't understand, by a song? People can cry when they're hearing like a Middle Eastern lullaby, and they don't understand a word of it, but they get the emotion.
Yeah.
So
That's yeah, Rodney Bingenheimer said, mayor of Sunset Strip, said the Grateful Dead killed rock and roll. About over the last 2 days, I've watched clips. My brother went to the Sphere in Vegas. Do you know about this venue called the Sphere? Dude,
yes, I've heard.
It's the greatest venue to see music in the world right
Tell
now.
me, have you been?
No, and I don't need to go. I'm happy it happened. It's YouTube. And
is it a dome? Is it like a projection dome?
Huge dome. And watch 2 minutes of a clip of the Dead playing at the Sphere. And immediately, because I was a Deadhead way back, it made me cry. And it's like I couldn't believe how it was touching me in a matter of seconds, because it was just emotional. But the way the visual, and all you do is see this teeny little stage with this band, and then this visual is just overwhelming you. And they've got speakers in the seats, and it's unbelievable. It is the state of the art. It's sad that the smaller groups can't play there, but only the big ones. And so this is the follow-up to that. What is more fundamental, language or music, Ben? Is tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh. You're laughing because it sounds stupid. How could a song without words make someone laugh? Do you need words to make you laugh? Anyways, go ahead.
No, check it out. I'm laughing because, well, I love to laugh, and because I can imagine. I laugh at a lot of music. In fact, this is funny, Gerry. I have not released this yet because I'm worried it will destroy my credibility in my career. I have made a record of laughing jazz standards.
Oh, wow.
And I guess if I were to all right. So I basically took some classic jazz standard melodies.
Yeah.
Typically ones, well, I call them standards. I mean, they can be bebop or even some of the show tunes, and I just laughed them. And now it's not a complete record yet. I've done this into my voice message on my phone as sort of reference tracks for what I want to do. And it's just going to be a hit it and quit it kind of record. I just want to put because I'm kind of mocking the whole jazz, the whole almost a Frank Zappa sort of approach.
Yeah.
But I'm also showing how when I was in high school, I got into this fierce argument, this debate with a good friend of mine. His name's Frank. Hey, Frank Vason. Frank Vason is now a very accomplished reed man in New York City. He went on tour with John Scofield. He's done Broadway shows.
Wow.
For a period of his youth, when I knew him in high school, he was a dick. he, he would find your button. He would find the thing about you and just poke and drill away at whatever your weakness was. And he loved to see people writhe uncomfortably. And as a baritone saxophone player, he loved to play in a way that would make people writhe. And part of that was his perception of beauty and power and what jazz was supposed to be as he found his voice, as he struggled through his own. Well, we got into a big debate, and he told me once, because we were talking about what instruments could you play jazz on, and what instruments could not play jazz. Yeah. And he told me that a slide whistle could be used to play jazz. Yeah. And I said, no way, man, because the sound bothered me, the slippy, slidey. I said, nah. Well, of course, many years later, I come to find that Louis Armstrong actually played slide whistle on a recording.
Wow.
Yeah, I just found that out within the last 2 years. My point being that we should never, jazz musicians tend to take themselves too seriously in this day and age. Yeah. And jazz, there used to be a place for a lot of humor in jazz music. And, ironically enough, take a look at Dizzy Gillespie and even Louis Armstrong. And those guys would get attacked by serious jazz musicians who would complain about clowning around. You shouldn't be clowning around. You shouldn't be smiling and laughing. Well, anyway, so the music that makes me laugh, well, cartoon music is a great example. It's sometimes designed to make you laugh, frick swap dup wing,
that's called Carl Stalling.
Carl Stalling. I so want to do a documentary on those guys. I think someone beat me to the punch. Yeah. The creation of that Carl Stalling music, and there was another guy, a couple people, to me that's fascinating. There's music that makes me laugh for sure.
That's a really good answer, Carl Stalling. I don't get that. I usually get the Benny Hill theme song, or Yakety Yak, that. But what you said was they take jazz. Who does that the really good is Slim Gaillard. He's a black guy. Look, if you haven't heard Slim, he is an amazing jazz black guy who sang Jewish jazz songs, and they're funny, and there are people, let's get into silence now, the opposite, Ben. How do you know when not to play? You're a rhythm guy. How do you know when to incorporate silence? Talk about the dynamics of not playing and silence.
Well, the obvious answer for a musician is you should stop playing when you're lost, or if you don't, that's one good rule of thumb. Like if you don't know what's going on or where you are, just lay out. Yeah. But that's a great question, because, and perhaps that has to do with the development of taste and a broader sense of hearing. That's a product of maturity, and not necessarily maturity as a human being, or but certainly musical maturity, an awareness of sound and what the other sounds or people are doing, and an awareness of what you're doing. It's pretty deep, Gerry. It's really deep. There's a way to break that down intellectually. And if we were training, like in a studio practicing music, we would break that down very intellectually. In the heat of battle, it should be an emotional, immediate reaction to your environment, either a reaction or a proaction. In other words, if you feel the need, if you feel that silence is what's needed in the moment, then you create silence. Here's a contrived instance. when the audience gets louder and louder and louder, a wise group of musicians will start to play softer and softer and softer. Sometimes maybe just lay out in order to bring the audience, in order to get the audience to start listening again instead of being louder than the band. So that's a technique employed more as a control of environment. But
wow, we're going to get into that. Let me bounce a couple silent quotes off you so that we can get deeper, because this is.
Let me say one. Let me just share one example, Gerry, with your about. I was recently spending time with someone. I'm not going to name them, and this person would ask me questions. We hadn't seen each other in a long time. They would ask me questions and then continue to qualify their question, and they would continue to qualify, offering me different angles with which, and then they would start to supply their own answer. So, as a musician, that would be someone overplaying. Make a statement. Yeah,
sounds like me.
No. You're you give and you enjoy the questioning process.
I know, but that's when you come
so
to
much
Venice,
space.
You got to come to Venice and meet Brad Kay. He's one of the greatest musicologists, jazz pianists there. He knows all about Louis Armstrong, Buddy Bolton, everything. And whenever we jam on these, like, the Dead meet P-Funk, meet Zappa, meet the Shags for 3 hours. And Brad comes in and plays a little trumpet, though, lowers himself to play this weird music. I play duck calls, kazoos, and all these noisemakers. And he goes, dude, you have no subtlety with that. All you do is, rah, rah, rah. Like, lighten up a little. It's like I'm Spike Jones on acid. It's like, oh no, Spike Jones, Peter Lorre and Spike Jones, the imitation. He goes, you're driving me sane.
I would love to come out there and meet you guys.
Oh yeah, you got it. Okay, so Monk said silence is the loudest sound in the universe.
I love it. I would have to completely agree with Monk.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one of those ones I can't answer. Or I would ruin the statement.
Yeah. That's you gave me your John Cage cream pie, Gerry. I'm going to shove it back in your face. Okay.
No, everything comes from the void. Everything comes from the silence. So, it goes back to your question about silence. Is I haven't been playing professionally drums in a number of years since I moved to Bali. Yeah. But just before I got to Bali, I was getting to a level in my playing where I was starting to hear myself less. In other words, I started to realize, I started to question how much of my playing, and I'm speaking pretty much in a jazz context. If you're playing in a rock band or blues, a drummer has a function to play. You can't just decide to drop out. If the dance, when the dance floor is filled with people and you're feeling like the guitarist needs a few moments to shine on those notes. I mean, but in jazz, oftentimes there is a place to lay out more. And I started to catch myself asking, am I playing from an ego-driven place, like because I'm trying to fulfill a role of a drummer, and the more I keep playing, the more chance I have of doing well, of getting to that level, which is a ridiculous but normal mental process. I think a lot of musicians go through that. So I started saying, well, because a drummer has 4 limbs. Most drummers have 4 limbs that they're working with, and we spend thousands of hours pushing those 4 limbs to do as many unusual things as possible. And so when we start to play time, especially in a jazz or creative music, we tend to want to get to that level to express the elevated art we have developed, quote unquote. And oftentimes the music or the people we're playing with, it doesn't ask for that. It doesn't need it. So it's like driving a car. You don't always have to be going forward fast. A car can sit at the side of the road and you can do lots of things. So a drummer drummers need to learn to drop their limbs out, just to play with your right hand, with your ride cymbal only. You don't need your hi-hat going. You don't need your bass drum. And so less is more. And then if you're playing with just your right hand, see what happens if you lay out a little bit. And what happens is you actually end up re-empowering yourself by taking yourself back into the realm of silence. Then when you come back with something, it speaks with more power.
So well put. When Mahavishnu opened for Zappa, after a few shows, Frank told Chester Thompson and Ralph Humphrey, go get double bass drums like Billy Cobham, to have the double bass.
Yeah.
And then the other one was Charlie Hayden's drummer. I always forget his name, but he played with Billie Holiday and everybody. And I said to him once, I heard that jazz drummers lost all their subtlety when the bass guitar got amplified. And he knew about brushes. Most, jazz drummers these days, I guess they used brushes, but less. He said, one of our models was, you can stick me up and brush me off. That the subtlety in brushes are not going to be heard when you got a bass player amplified. So just imagine no amplified bass in the drummer's relationship, and then all of a sudden amplified bass. Oh, what is the drummer going to do? So here's one more or two more on silence, Ben. Ai Weiwei, the artist. For me, silence is music. Is silence music, or is it something different?
Well, silence is in the ear of the beholder. I mean, I think the answer is, to a human being, yes, it can be. Again, it kind of depends how we're defining music. And silence. Is silence the absence of all vibration? In which case it's the void. But I think, without getting too deep, the answer is yes, of course. If silence is quieting ourselves, quieting our mind, quieting our inner thoughts, the silence allows us to hear the sounds of the earth and the universe. In that sense, nobody has really been able to have any real silence to know what it is. Because the earth is always, there's wind, there's birds. There are these chambers, anechoic chambers. I forget how you pronounce it. Yeah, it's
where John Cage said he wanted to hear silence. He went in there and he heard two things: his blood pumping and his heart beating.
Exactly, which is not silence.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a very quiet place, and yes, we hear our heart beat and blood pulsing as music. I tend to think, music is everywhere and in everything, when there's, so in that sense, I would agree.
Yeah.
But
what are you talking about called dynamics, or is dynamics something different?
Dynamics is something different. A scientist could get into the sine wave, the amplitude, if we're going to talk about loud and soft, that's basically, to the average person, dynamics is loud and soft. It can be more deep. It can be, you can have a dynamic silent expression, but it's interesting. I'd like to go back just a minute to the whole thing, the double bass drum comment you made, and the
brushes. Yeah.
It's very interesting because drummers hate to be told what to do in terms of how to play their drums. So those stories are always interesting because it's always interesting to see how the drummer will react. If a drummer is really there to serve the music and to be a faithful sideman to their leader, they'll do whatever the leader asks them to do.
Yeah.
And like the Shag's father, the irony is that oftentimes if we allow ourselves to be guided, great things we can be pushed beyond our limitations. So I think double bass drum pedals are great. And I actually challenged myself at one point. I started using double bass drum pedals in a jazz context with my brushes. So
Wow.
yeah, because there was such a cliche hang up about double bass drums. Oh, the people are like, you don't need them. If you can't do it with one foot, you shouldn't do it with two. And other people like, like the only point about double bass drums was to be loud, was to be rock. And I said, I can use them. I think it's great. It's like, why do we use two sticks?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't, it's ridiculous. We have 2 feet. So I started practicing them to be fast and soft within an acoustic jazz setting. And I just thought it would be cool to be taking a solo and and I did that for a while. I didn't really continue and develop it. It quite honestly, most acoustic jazz gigs take place in spaces that are so small that to bring in one extra pedal, which extends the footprint of my kit, was kind of precluded my ability to play my hi-hat comfortably. Drummers will know what I'm talking about. You need you may only need an extra 1.5 feet, but am I there? What?
No, you got it. You mean you got to move your foot? You don't have 3 feet.
I thought you were telling me to look out for the bee.
No, your third foot will take care of the bee, Ben.
Yeah.
But you mean if you have double bass, you have to have 2 feet, and then to go over, you have to move your foot over to hit your hi-hat? Is that what you meant?
Typically, yeah. What I mean is to rig up a double bass drum pedal, you've got 2 extra beaters hitting your bass drum. That's not a problem. But the one beater is fed on an extension arm out over to an auxiliary pedal that sits next to your hi-hat pedal.
Right.
So something's got to give. You've got to adjust your setup somehow. And typically what it does, jazz drummers tend to have a very close relationship with their hi-hats, and they've got to be really close in to facilitate the effortless and the agility. You're either going to put that other bass drum pedal on the outside of your hi-hat pedal, which is going to take up another 1.5 feet of space. And the whole double pedal rig, this sounds ridiculous, but is an extra carry case. Where's my camera? It's another big carry case of equipment. Right. And drummers are already trying to get stuff from the car to an elevator in one. It's a lot of extra gear. My point was that nothing wrong with double bass drum pedals. The first man to use them, actually, I'll let the secret out here. Only a very few people know how to answer that question. Who was the first drummer to use double bass drum pedals? And if you take a second to Google search that, which I'd like you to do, Gerry, I would bet $10 and near 99% guarantee you will get the wrong answer. From
who is it, and what's the usual wrong answer?
The usual wrong answer is Louis Bellson.
And what's the right answer?
So Google search who's the first drummer to play double bass drum pedals, or who invented the double bass drum pedal. And an AI and Google, the wrong answer has been copy and pasted so often. It's reprinted in reputable music magazines. Very well-intentioned, articulate, smart drummers have the wrong answer. AI gets you the wrong answer. Google gets you the wrong answer. The correct answer is Ray McKinley. Ray McKinley was a drummer who worked with, originally Glenn Miller, and then he worked with Will Bradley, and they had a band together. They had a big hit in the 40s. They had a big hit. I think it was called "Beat Me, Daddy." Eight to the bars. Beat Me, Daddy. 8.
I know that song.
And Ray McKinley sang it. He was a singer and a drummer. He invented the double bass drum pedal. He invented it along with a man from the Slingerland Drum Company, whose name I have written in my notes. and he first used it in 1940. Louis
Wow.
Bellson, and of course Ray used it. He played it, and he quickly determined that it was impractical. He didn't like it. He stopped using it. But
Wow.
he did it. He did it first. Louis Bellson came along 6 years later and was off to the races. He played it. He loved it. He was great at it. Louis Bellson was one of the greatest, jazz big bands
Yeah.
drummers, and Louis Bellson deserves credit for a lot of things. Louis Bellson actually did invent a few other things, but he did not invent the double bass treble. And
Wow.
people like to say he did because he has a great story. And his story is that he sketched a design of a double bass drum kit while in high school when he was 15 years old, which would have been, if I remember correctly, this would have been about 1939 when Louis Bellson was in high school. And it wasn't until 6 years later that he had it developed. And we're talking this is different than what I described to you. This is not an auxiliary pedal. This was actually two bass drums with their own pedal. So it took up a huge amount of space. Anyway, that's a huge discursion.
No, but that's what I want to learn. This is amazing. It's like, who invented finger tapping? It wasn't Eddie Van Halen. It was Harvey Mandel. I love all that stuff. And then someone goes, no, Slam Stewart, blah, blah, blah. I love to, one major composer, I said, who did that? He goes, I'm not into first. I goes, I'm not into first. I'm into studying the history and how it comes, down. And you have taught me something important, So we've gone over 90 again. Can I, you want to close out this session with one more music? Well, let's finish Silence first. Can you go a few more minutes?
Yeah, I'll help you. The double bass drum story can be corroborated with, because you're going to lay this on some people and they're going to go, dude, that's ridiculous. How do you know that? Bert Corral wrote a book called The Drumming Men.
Yeah.
The Heartbeat of Jazz, The Swing Years.
Yeah.
Korall. In that book, he interviews both. This story is corroborated by Ray McKinley, I believe, tells it himself. There's the guy that he invented it with, and it's corroborated by Buddy Rich's own manager, Stanley Kay.
Yeah.
And I also believe Mel Torme acknowledges this. Anyway, okay. Silence. What?
Mel's amazing. Mel is amazing. Just to bring up his name, because my friend taught Susie the real kings, the king and queen of scat singing are Ella and Mel. Mel is, he's not always credited, because you get Eddie Jefferson, John Hendricks, all the Leo Carroll, all the scat singers get the credit, but Mel is one who can do it. So I love all this. This is what, to me, is what's the whole cool thing about music. It's something you don't have to know anything about, but if you do choose to know something about it, you could even go deeper with it. Because I wanted to mention two things about Billy Cobham, because that double bass really made an impact on us. When we heard Billy Cobham doing that, we were like, whoa. And, it was the fusion era. And they asked Frank Zappa, what do you think of jazz rock fusion? Because he really helped invent it with Hot Rats, Miles Within a Silent Way. And there's a couple other people who get credited who fused jazz and rock. Says, Frank, what do you think of jazz rock fusion? He goes, the only fusion I see is between the cash box and the musician. Because they know if they put a rock beat to jazz, kids will buy their music,
Frank Zappa had a beautiful, irreverent, what an intellect. And but he was hardwired to cynicism, I believe.
Oh no, he was a satirist. And then here's the other Billy Cobham, which I've told for years. Billy put either a quarter or a nickel up on the wall and drum rolled and held it there. Have you ever heard that?
No. I've heard a story about drawing a circle the size of a quarter in the center of your drum heads to aim and play exactly
Yeah.
in the center of your head. No, I believe it. I could believe
Yeah.
that story.
I mean, I
Sure.
told that for years, and then a Cal Arts jazz, whiz kid said, "That's bullshit." And I go, "Thanks. I don't care if it's true or not, or if Billy did it in front of me. I just think it's an amazing thought to, have one stick holding a coin up, then the other stick holds the coin up, and you hold the coin up by doing a drum roll on the wall with the coin."
It's fantastic. It's just the idea, the notion is going to send drummers to go try that. So whether Billy did it or not, I think that's cool. I'm going to try that.
The other silence line I would love to hear any reaction to is Thomas Carlyle. Speech is of time, silence is of eternity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's very well put.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I could almost unequivocally agree on today without any qualification. I'd never heard of that guy, Thomas Carlyle.
Yeah, Carlyle. I have to look him up. I just did wiki quote on silence and pulled some of my favorites. Oh. And I really appreciate that. So Ben, why don't you want to close off with one more? Or we just
let's close off with another one.
Okay, if you can. This is Ruth Draper. She kind of been.
I'm glad you mentioned women.
Yeah, please. She's one of the keys of performance art. Theater. They were women who did monologues. It was what Marcia McLuhan's mom did. She did monologues. They would get on stage and just kind of talk half theater. And she said the key is to bring the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who must give you even more than you give them in the way of imagination and creative power. How do you do that? You've performed in front of people in all kinds of settings. How do you engage the audience?
Wow, that's great. Well, you've got to feel them, and I think the great performers develop through experience, an ability to feel the energy of a room. You'll hear that a lot. How a performer works the room or plays to the room. I remember a great concert I saw. The saxophone player for James Brown.
Maceo Parker.
Thank you. Yeah, I saw Maceo Parker play with his band. It was phenomenal. It was in Boulder, Boulder, Colorado, and they came out. Everyone was in a 3-piece suit, and they just hit it, and they were funking, and the people were dancing, and it was like an hour and a half into what would be a 3-hour nonstop performance. An hour and a half into the set, Maceo calls like a slow 12/8 ballad.
Yeah.
And it was like literally that long. Everyone who was dancing stopped dancing. And Maceo just goes, bop, 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 and the drummer, the whole band, without dropping a beat, they were tin 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 pot ticka boom boom, just kept the room dancing. This was not an audience. This was not a room full of people who wanted to hear My Baby Left Me song. So so musicians and artists, they have these they project their feelings outwards, and then they can connect with the audience. There's all kinds of clues you can look for. You can actually look at the people and look at their faces. Stand-up comedians and great entertainers are reading people constantly. Magicians, every performer reads the crowd. The really adept ones will actually be feeling the room. They can feel the energy. They can feel if the breath and the energy and the attention of a room, and if they're losing it, they pull into their bag of tricks and bring the people back. Because like Ruth is suggesting, And this is interesting. This gets into the quantum physics that things change when they're observed. Well,
Yeah.
and performers, actors and musicians who love to be on stage. I say that because there are some artists who do not, who excel by being, painters in their room, or studio musicians who would prefer not to be on stage, which is kind of a
Yeah.
naked voyeuristic thing. But the musicians who love to be an artist on stage, they feel when 1,000 people are looking at them, it can put them in a zone where they start channeling and giving more.
Yeah.
In other words, the more eyeballs and electrons and photons and energy that's coming their way, the more on fire they become and the more they can give.
Yeah. That's then let's do one more, because this is a perfect follow-up.
Right
Leonard
on.
Leonard Cohen. The only way you can sell a concert is if you put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. What role does risk play in your creative process?
I think he's so right. And that's one of the crucial elements that challenges artists, because so many want the safe gig. So many artists these days, it's a vicious catch-22. They want the work. They want, and they're kind of expected to come up with and to show up with a product that's going to entertain, with a proven product, a proven show, something
Yeah.
that the establishment can bank on. So there's a kind of a catch-22. Once an artist becomes known as an individual, which is someone who takes risks, there's almost less risk involved. In other words, the artist is confronted with the challenge of exposing themselves in a way that is risky, that you say. What's the word that he used? Not risk. Was it
He
risk?
said the only way you can sell a concert is if you put yourself at risk. And if you don't do
risk,
that,
yeah.
people know. So,
Yes.
Back to Zappa Sideman, George Duke, in the middle of a solo, he's going, "Oh, I have the blues, just like I did last night," and he picks up on Frank's mockery. But I interviewed Napoleon Murphy Brock, who was the singer and saxophonist in that same band with George. And when I asked him that question, I says, "What role does risk play in your creative process?" He goes, "I leave it in the dressing room." So he's like saying, I have to come out, and this is, I'd love you to respond. He comes out, I feel confident. Even though I might make a mistake, I've got to carry on the show like I know what I'm doing. So that was another way to approach it. But everybody I ask go, "Oh yeah, risk plays an important part in my creative."
Well, it's interesting because artists want to say that. We want to believe, that we're going out there and taking risks. However, when you balance it with the commercial needs, and here's a story: a friend of mine, a great tenor saxophone player named Jeff Barish. We used to play together a lot years ago, and he's like a master chess player as well. He taught me a lot about chess. He was backing up the big names when he worked in Reno and Vegas. He was in the big bands that backed up Sinatra and Dean Martin. And he was sitting next to, in the saxophone section, I believe it was Harold Land.
I know Harold Land is amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. Harold Land is a man with a reputation. He's a great jazz, in the jazz world. He's known, just like, and they were backing up one of these famous show guys, Sammy Davis Jr. or whoever. And every night on this one song, Harold Land had a featured solo.
Yeah.
And Harold Land would stand up, and every night he played the same exact solo in this 12-bar solo spot. And one night, Jeff Barish, who was probably a young man at the time, got up the courage and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Land, I got to ask you a question." "Yeah, what is it?" "Is you're the famous jazz saxophone player, Harold Land, and yet you stand up and play the same solo every night. Why do you do that?" And he said, "Listen, Jeff, the people out in that audience has paid $100 per ticket to come here and be entertained. 12 bars ain't enough space for me to develop something great. I worked something out. It's going to work every night. Those people are going to get their money's worth, and I'm not going to step on my ass here trying to improvise something in 12
Wow.
bars.
Wow, that's heavy. Yeah. I
So
mean,
there's that predictable show element, like a Broadway show. You're
yeah.
not there to innovate and take risks every night. You're there to give the illusion of taking a risk. And I think magicians are masters at that, and actors. They give you the illusion of taking a great risk with their personal safety or their emotions every night. It's a show. They're
Dude,
actors.
that is amazing. See, what you do, Ben, so well is take all my questions and go deeper, because that's Steely Dan used to open for Frank, and they said they'd go backstage and goes, dude, we've got to play what's on our albums. Why don't you? And Frank goes, because I don't want to. But I mean, here's the funny thing. I want to ask Donald Fagen, if you can ever ask him, did you say that meaning your record company told you to play the songs as you have them on the albums, or you guys decided to play the songs? So they probably, you go ahead. Yeah.
Well, it's really deep. I've read histories of the early jazz bands. This arguably is what kind of led to bebop being innovated. Was the dance bands, the swing bands of the 30s were filled, obviously with a lot of great musicians, individuals working for band leaders. The band leaders were expected to travel across the US and play their hits. And the oral histories say, these band leaders say, the people in the audience wanted to hear the same solo, trumpet, trombone, as the one on the record. And how they knew that, I guess, I don't know if the local promoters told them that, but that was the gig. We're here to play, 90% the hits as they were recorded. And this is in the 1930s. So by the end of the 30s, you had, kind of a mutiny on a certain degree with these musicians who had spent 10 years playing and they wanted to step out. They wanted to be jazz. They wanted to create something fresh every night. So it's the commercial needs of the masses have to be balanced. And it's a great question. Is it the record labels telling them, or could they read the room when they veered away from the hits? Did they feel that they were losing the audience?
They beat up, Ornette came out of King Curtis. He'd admit it, but he started playing solos and they would beat him up. They would break his plastic saxophone, or it's like the Shags playing their high school party and people throwing Coke cans at them.
Yeah.
But Astor Piazzolla changed the tango in South America, and they would literally beat him up on the street. Then they realized he's accepted worldwide as an innovator. Now we'll sell T-shirts with his face on it and coffee mugs and go, he's from Argentina. We love him. Well, we used to beat him up, but now we love him.
That guy's a genius. Wow.
Oh, God, yeah. Well, you're a genius, Ben. It's been so fun. And, I always milk it more than 90 minutes with you because you teach me a lot. We have so much fun. Oh. We'll plan a part 3. It's going to be not an 8-part Netflix series, maybe a 12-part.
I love this, Gerry. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's really fun. And we can go so much deeper. And I just can't wait to get into documentary filmmaking. I mean, I
can't.
Yeah, are you a fly on the wall or a fly in the soup kind of maker? That's when you quoted the Soupy Sales without, who Soupy Sales is?
Uh-huh.
Oh, yeah. So you quoted Fang earlier on. You didn't realize. Go watch the tape and you'll go, that's his Fang voice. And his kids played with David Bowie. And I was going to tell you, wait, Ben, I've got this great Soupy Sales joke. And it's with Frank Sinatra. It's a skit with Frank Sinatra and, the Rat Pack, and Soupy's the waiter. And Frank goes, excuse me, waiter, what is this fly doing in my soup? And Soupy goes, looks like the backstroke to me.
I've seen that one. I love it. That's amazing. Well, that's like, I love that stuff. I love I'm appreciative of you giving me a platform to talk, and I love exploring things with you. I learn a lot. I've got a list of names here, people that you've quoted, and I love the laughs that we share.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever you do, don't believe me.
Oh, the quarter on the wall. I've got a new assignment now.
Yeah, you mean my whole fallacy is wrong.
I love it.
Or here's the best one I love is Marcel Duchamp. I'm gonna contradict myself, I'm gonna contradict myself so I don't conform to my own ideas.
I'm going to contradict myself. So, you know, that's a great exercise in staying fresh, for sure.
Yeah.
And not taking yourself too seriously.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, when I was doing the laughing song, I had a visceral reaction to people I see just taking jazz way too seriously, turning it into this object of worship of which we shall not violate the principles or the rules. Right. Yeah. So I'm making these laughing jazz songs, and I'm at the same time doing research on the history of jazz, and I come across one, and you're going to love this because of your love of history. One of the first recordings, one of the earliest recordings, is the laughing song.
Oh, I know that song. Brad plays that. That's amazing.
The George W. Johnson. I can check my notes. 1898. Yeah. So there you go. I mean, whistling and laughing and the universal sounds prior to language. In music.
Yeah, we don't know it. You know, I love to ask these questions because you musicologists know it all. So always go, no way.
You just reminded me. Remember the question you asked me, what music makes me laugh?
Yeah.
And I'm more prone. I tend to be tickled and moved by non-intellectual things. So like people who sing funny songs, they're clever and funny. They don't make me laugh as much as like Clark Terry singing "Hey Mr. Mumbles."
Oh, Mumbles is one of the greatest songs ever.
I just love it because he skirts. Yeah, his so the ball first sound the bloody hero.
Oh,
and
God.
As he come down and said the hair to my phone. Did you say no? No, wait a while. I thought you said no. Wait a minute. He's almost saying now. You just wait a minute, but you don't. Well, no, wait a minute. I thought you, but I love that. That stuff gets me going because you can talk like that with anybody, anywhere in the world, and have this great connection. In fact, I'll do that sometimes here. I get cornered by a Balinese who, after they hear me say like "apa kabar," how are you?
Yeah.
They assume I can speak the language, so they start. And so I'll just riff with them. I'll have fun. And it's like.
But that's Clark Terry was actually the teacher of one of my band members. I was like, you studied with Clark Terry? Did you see the documentary on Clark?
Yes.
That's
the one with the piano player, the blind
piano
player?
Was lucky. That kid really, he was just he got lucky, and then Quincy gave him the money to do it. But it's sort of like
I was hoping. I know.
Really, I mean, he got lucky. All he was doing was filming his friend, and then all of a sudden he realized, well, I kind of have a movie on Clark, and he's going to have his legs chopped off, and blah blah blah. And then all of a sudden, Quincy stepped in and gave him the money, and he kind of made a good film because it really captured the importance of Clark as one of the greatest ever. But he basically invented jazz education.
Yeah, well, he took it to a very high level. Yeah, you're right. There's so many guys like that deserve way more recognition and documentaries made about them. And Clark, you're right. Clark was one of the most amazing players who bridged the gap between being able to intellectualize and create a curriculum, create a pedagogy for jazz to transfer that knowledge, the knowledge that used to be done, in
Yeah.
the streets, on the stage.
Yep. But here's the last thing, and I'm not asking the question, and we'll ponder it next time, is did humans hear birds whistling and crickets and then imitate it? Or did we start humming and whistling and then the birds imitated us? Now we know, and everybody goes, no, the birds were first. I goes, how do you know?
That's right. How do you know?
It's called biomimicry. We imitate nature. Biomimicry. It's amazing.
We do. You said you didn't want me to answer that yet.
Nope, no way, Ben. I'm not going off on any more tangents. That's the end for you.
I love it.
Look, man. Susie's walking in. The fucking, what do you call your wife?
The executive producer
is about to walk in here and say, turn that fucking Zoom off, man. I need some loving.
Oh, by the way, the funniest thing you said about not answering a question, like a question that's so good, I can't give you an answer to that. Remember?
That's John.
Who? John Cage?
John Cage.
If I ever tried to respond to my wife like that, I'd be out. You will give me an answer for my question. Answer my question now. And not don't answer me with body language. Use words. I try to answer questions with body language too much, I guess.
I can't wait. Let me turn this off.
Okay,
and
yeah.
Then I'll tell you a couple of my favorite jokes that I don't want to be on. Okay.
Okay. All right.
Thanks a lot, Ben. I'll see you next time. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button now, and I hope this never ends. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Gerry Fialka. I appreciate it.
Ow!